A plane crash near Washington, D.C., 67 lives lost, but Barron Trump sees what no one else does. A missing black box, a secret phone call, and a chilling cover-up. As he digs deeper, powerful forces warn him to stop. Will he uncover the truth, or will it be buried forever? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The night was calm over Washington, D.C. A gentle breeze carried the hum of the city, where the glow of streetlights reflected on the Potomac River's surface. Inside American Airlines Flight 217, passengers settled in as the plane made its final descent toward Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. Some dozed against their seats, weary from travel, while others clutched their armrests, eager to reunite with loved ones. For the crew, it was another routine landing, until it wasn't. At exactly 9:42 p.m., a sudden burst of static crackled through the control tower's communication line. A frantic voice cut through. "Mayday, mayday, we have an unidentified object." Then, silence. The explosion tore through the night, its fiery glow reflecting against the water below. A massive fireball erupted in the sky as the commercial airliner collided mid-air with an Army UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter. The force of the impact sent flaming debris raining down into the Potomac, illuminating the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument in an eerie, flickering glow. In an instant, 67 lives were lost. The chaos on the ground was immediate. Sirens wailed through the streets as emergency responders rushed toward the riverbanks. The control tower was in pandemonium, air traffic controllers frozen in horror, hands clutching their headsets. Within minutes, the media descended, their cameras capturing the heartbreaking scene. Shattered plane parts, black smoke rising against the Washington skyline, and the haunting echoes of families arriving at the airport, searching for loved ones who would never come home. Inside the White House, Barron Trump sat on the couch, his fingers gripping the armrest as the television screen flickered with breaking news. His stomach twisted, his chest tightening with a weight he couldn't quite explain. He had seen tragedy before. His father, President Donald Trump, had been at the center of political storms and national crises for years. But this was different. This wasn't just another news story. Something about this felt wrong. The news anchor's voice rang through the room, shaking with urgency. Authorities are still investigating what led to this unprecedented air disaster. Initial reports suggest a catastrophic failure in air traffic control communications. Barron's brow furrowed. A failure in communication? That didn't sit right with him. He leaned closer, eyes scanning the live aerial footage of the wreckage, the scattered remains of Flight 217 and the Black Hawk helicopter floating like ghosts on the river's surface. He could almost hear the screams, the final moments of those aboard, their last breaths stolen by something no one yet understood. He exhaled sharply, a cold determination settling into his bones. "There's more to this," he murmured to himself. "I know it." And just like that, his search for the truth began. By Thursday morning, the weight of the D.C. plane crash had settled heavily over the nation. News outlets were in a frenzy, dissecting every available piece of information. Black smoke still rose from the wreckage, the Potomac River now a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered lives. The White House was no different. Meetings were held behind closed doors, officials scrambling to explain how such an event could happen in a city with one of the most tightly controlled airspaces in the world. Barron Trump hadn't slept. He sat at his desk, his laptop screen flashing between different live news broadcasts. He played and replayed the footage, the last recorded communication between air traffic control and the doomed aircraft, his mind racing over the inconsistencies. Then he heard it. The slight hesitation in the air traffic controller's voice, the stumble, the pause, just seconds before the collision. Something was off. His heart pounded as he reached for his phone, but before he could make a call, a private number appeared on the screen. He hesitated, a strange chill running down his spine. After a deep breath, he pressed answer. "Barron, a distorted voice whispered. He sat up straight, his grip tightening around the phone. "Who is this?" he wanted to ask, but something told him to listen first. "You're right to ask questions. The world isn't seeing the full picture." His blood ran cold. The voice was shaky, urgent. And then, click. The line went dead. Barron lowered the phone slowly, his breath uneven. Someone knew something. And whoever they were, they wanted him to find out the truth. That evening, against the advice of his security team, Barron requested presidential clearance to visit the crash site. It was an unprecedented request, but President Trump, sensing his son's determination, gave the green light. By nightfall, Barron was standing near the riverbank, the icy wind biting his skin as he gazed at the dark waters, still littered with debris. The air smelled of jet fuel, and the silence that settled over the crash site was thick with grief. The site was still active with recovery teams, divers pulling wreckage from the depths, while grim-faced investigators spoke in hushed tones. Nearby, a woman clutched a framed photograph to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Barron hesitated before stepping toward her, his voice soft. "I'm so sorry for your loss." She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "My husband was on that plane," she whispered. "He called me before the crash. He knew something was wrong." Barron's stomach tightened. "What did he say?" The woman shook her head, trying to hold back sobs. "He said the helicopter wasn't supposed to be there. It came out of nowhere." Barron's pulse quickened. This wasn't just an accident. Someone had changed the flight path, put the helicopter directly in the jet's way. And someone was trying to bury that fact. Just then, he caught sight of an investigator on the phone, his back turned. The man's expression was tense, his voice just barely audible over the wind. Barron moved closer, straining to hear. "Air traffic control delayed response. Critical seconds lost. No, the files are already missing." Barron's blood ran cold. The next morning, back at the White House, he stormed into his father's office, his jaw clenched. President Trump sat at his desk, reading a classified briefing, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have gone there," the president said without looking up. "I had to," Barron shot back. A long silence filled the room before his father sighed, setting the folder aside. He met Barron's gaze, his voice low. "The truth will come out soon. Something went wrong that night. Something bigger than bad luck." Barron took a deep breath, his hands curling into fists. "Then why does it feel like someone is trying to hide it?" His father didn't answer right away. Finally, he exhaled and leaned forward, folding his hands together. "I have people looking into it," he admitted. "But listen to me, Barron. This isn't a game. You're the president's son. That makes you a target. Be careful what you ask." Barron met his father's gaze, his determination unwavering. "I don't care about politics. I care about the 67 people who never made it home." And deep in his gut, he knew this wasn't just incompetence. It was something more sinister. The morning after Barron Trump's visit to the crash site, the Potomac River was still a graveyard of secrets, its dark waters holding the remains of a tragedy that had shaken the nation. Yet for Barron, it was more than a tragedy. It was a puzzle, one that someone desperately wanted to keep unsolved. His suspicions had only grown after hearing the investigators' whispered conversation the night before. Missing files, delayed responses, critical seconds lost. Someone was hiding something, and he intended to find out what. Barron sat in the secure communications room of the White House, a space reserved for high-priority research. His laptop screen flickered as he scrolled through the FAA's official crash report, his eyes scanning every word. The official narrative painted the accident as a tragic miscalculation, a miscommunication between air traffic control and the pilots. But he knew better. Pilots don't just miscalculate in restricted airspace. His heart pounded as he reached the section detailing the flight control logs. Something stood out, a 3-minute gap. 3 minutes in which the Army helicopter should have been ordered to change course, but wasn't. 3 minutes where the jet's warning systems should have been triggered, but remained silent. His breath caught. 3 minutes. That was all it took to turn a routine landing into a disaster. Before he could process what it meant, his phone vibrated. A text from Andrew Lawson, an investigative journalist and someone Barron had come to trust over the years. "Meet me. It's bigger than you think." The words sent a chill down Barron's spine. He grabbed his coat, ignoring the cautious glances from his security team as he strode toward the door. Minutes later, he was in the back of an armored SUV, weaving through the streets of Washington, D.C. toward an undisclosed location. He knew meeting Andrew was a risk, but he had to know the truth. The car pulled into a quiet parking garage, the dim overhead lights casting long shadows. Andrew was already there, standing near a concrete pillar, his face pale. "You're not going to like what I found," he said grimly as Barron stepped out. Andrew held up a USB drive, his hands shaking slightly. "This is what they don't want you to see." Barron took the drive without hesitation, his fingers tightening around it. "What's on it?" Andrew glanced around, lowering his voice. "The control tower recordings. The ones they said were damaged." Barron's stomach twisted. If these files were real, it meant the FAA had lied. Back at the White House, Barron locked himself in the communications room, inserting the USB drive into his laptop. The audio logs loaded instantly, a crackling hum filling his speakers. He fast-forwarded to the final minutes before the crash. Then, he heard it. "American 217, maintain final approach, cleared for landing." A pause. A long, unnatural pause. Then a second voice, shaky, uncertain. "Tower, we have an unconfirmed aircraft in restricted space. Do we have confirmation on?" A loud burst of static, then silence. Barron froze. His pulse roared in his ears. The control tower knew. They had seen the Army helicopter before the crash happened, and yet, no action was taken. Someone had deliberately silenced the warnings. A knock at the door snapped him out of his trance. He yanked out the USB drive just as his father's chief of staff, Robert Ellison, entered. "Your father wants to see you." Minutes later, Barron stood before President Trump in the Oval Office, the tension between them heavier than before. "You need to stop this," his father said, his voice low. Barron placed the USB on the Resolute desk, staring at his father. They lied. President Trump glanced at the drive, then back at Barron. "Do you know what you're getting yourself into? I know that 67 people are dead and someone is covering it up." The president let out a slow breath, rubbing his temples. Finally, he picked up the drive, turning it over in his hands. "This isn't about a crash, Barron. This is about power." Barron's fists clenched. "Then who has that power?" His father looked at him, his expression unreadable. "That's what I'm trying to find out." Barron wasn't satisfied. He needed names. That night, unable to shake the urgency of what he had discovered, he made another call, this time to the one person who could tell him exactly what happened in the control tower that night, Gregory Sloan, the air traffic control supervisor. When Sloan picked up, his voice was tight with fear. "You shouldn't have called me," he whispered. Barron's grip on his phone tightened. "Tell me the truth, Mr. Sloan. Who ordered the delay?" A long silence. Then, barely above a whisper, "It wasn't an accident." Barron's blood turned to ice. "Who?" Sloan exhaled sharply, his voice shaking. "I don't know, but I got a call just minutes before it happened. A voice told me to step away. They knew, Barron. They knew, and they let it happen." Barron swallowed, his throat dry as dust. "Wait." Sloan hesitated. Then, a click. The line went dead. A black SUV idled outside Barron's window, its engine running, watching. And for the first time, he truly understood. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a message. Barron's hands trembled as he stared at his phone, the call from Gregory Sloan now dead. The weight of the conversation pressed against his chest like a stone. This wasn't just a bureaucratic failure or a technical miscalculation. This was something deliberate. Someone, somewhere, had made a decision that led to 67 innocent people dying in the icy waters of the Potomac River. The air in his White House suite felt heavy. The room was dimly lit, his laptop screen casting a ghostly glow as he reopened the flight logs Andrew had given him. Every instinct in him screamed that he was close to something enormous, something that someone wanted buried. His father's words echoed in his mind. "This isn't about a crash, Barron. This is about power." Power. But whose? A low hum vibrated through the desk as his phone lit up again. An unknown number. His fingers hovered over the screen before answering. "You need to stop," a distorted voice warned. Barron's heart pounded. "Who is this?" "Walk away, kid. This is bigger than you." He clenched his jaw. Bigger than me, or bigger than the truth? The line went dead. A cold chill ran down his spine. He was being watched. Barron grabbed his jacket, slipping out of his suite before his security team could question him. He knew he had limited time before someone shut him down for good. In a quiet alleyway behind a nondescript office building in Arlington, Andrew Lawson waited, hands buried in his coat pockets. The streetlights flickered above him, casting erratic shadows against the brick walls. Barron stepped out of the car, his security detail reluctantly watching from a distance. "You sure about this?" Andrew asked, glancing over his shoulder. "This guy's been off the grid for years. If he's coming out now, it means he's desperate or he knows he doesn't have much time left," Barron finished. A figure emerged from the shadows, a middle-aged man with unkempt gray hair and sunken eyes. James Kessler, a former FAA investigator. "You don't know what you've stepped into, kid," Kessler muttered, lighting a cigarette with trembling hands. "Then tell me," Barron said, meeting his gaze head-on. Kessler exhaled a cloud of smoke, glancing down the alley before speaking. "The helicopter wasn't supposed to be there. It was diverted at the last second. The FAA's official report? It's a lie. The real clearance orders came from higher up." "How high?" Andrew pressed. Kessler scoffed, rubbing his forehead. "Higher than you can imagine." Barron narrowed his eyes. "The black box. It was taken before the investigators arrived. Where is it?" Kessler hesitated, looking genuinely torn before finally whispering, "It's in a private intelligence vault, Reagan National, Hangar 17, but you didn't hear that from me." The tension was suffocating. "And the person who changed the flight path?" Barron asked. Kessler flicked his cigarette into the darkness. "The same person who ordered the files erased and the tower logs deleted?" Barron's pulse thundered. "Who?" Kessler turned to him, his eyes filled with quiet fear. "Ask your father." The words hit Barron like a freight train. Back at the White House, Barron stormed into the Oval Office, his breath ragged, his fists clenched. His father was sitting at his desk, reviewing classified reports. He barely looked up. "You knew," Barron said, his voice shaking. The president finally raised his gaze, his expression unreadable. "I told you to let it go, Barron. Hangar 17, the flight path, the erased files. You knew." His father exhaled, setting his pen down. "Son, listen to me. No, 67 people are dead and you're telling me to let it go?" Barron's voice cracked with anger, frustration, and something deeper, betrayal. The room was thick with silence. Then, for the first time, his father's composure wavered. "You think I wanted this?" the president said, his voice low but laced with emotion. "You think I don't care? There are things happening in this country that even the President of the United States can't control." Barron's blood ran cold. "Then tell me who can." His father stared at him for a long moment before finally whispering, "The ones who really run this country." The words chilled Barron to his core. "The shadow government," he murmured. His father's silence was all the confirmation he needed. "Then why don't you expose them?" Barron demanded. His father looked tired, more exhausted than Barron had ever seen him before. "Because, son, the moment you expose them, you sign your own death warrant." Barron's chest tightened with fear, but also resolve. "Then let them come for me." The president sighed, rubbing his temple. "You don't understand. The reason that helicopter was diverted, the reason the flight path was changed, it wasn't just a mistake. It was a message. Barron felt a lump in his throat. To who? His father hesitated before finally speaking. To me. Barron's world shattered in an instant. The crash, the cover-up, the erased files. It wasn't random, it was a warning. His father leaned forward. If you keep digging, they won't just come for you, Barron. They'll come for me, for your mother, for everyone you love. Barron's breath was shallow, but his mind was clear. So what do we do? He asked. His father's eyes darkened. We fight them. And in that moment, Barron Trump realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about a plane crash. It was about who truly controlled America. And now they knew he was coming for them. Barron Trump stood at the edge of the White House balcony, staring out over Washington, D.C. The city lights flickered like dying embers, but tonight everything felt different. Everything felt darker. The weight of what he had uncovered pressed down on him like a lead weight in his chest. This wasn't just a cover-up. It was a warning, a message. The real question was, would he listen? His father's words still echoed in his mind. If you keep digging, they won't just come for you, Barron. They'll come for me, for your mother, for everyone you love. That was supposed to scare him. It was supposed to stop him, but it didn't. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a message from Andrew Lawson, the journalist who had risked everything to help him uncover the truth. Andrew, they know you're close. We don't have much time. Meet me at the safe house. Barron exhaled slowly, slipping his phone back into his jacket. His mind was racing. Gregory Sloan had already vanished, either running for his life or silenced forever. The black box had been stolen before investigators arrived. The shadow government had changed the flight path at the last second, and now they were watching him. He wasn't naive. The people behind this weren't ordinary politicians or corrupt businessmen. These were the ones who had pulled the strings for decades, hidden behind bureaucracy and national security. They had orchestrated wars, elections, and now they had sent a message written in blood. 67 innocent lives lost in the Potomac River. They expected him to back down. They expected him to be afraid. They were wrong. Barron moved quickly. He didn't tell his father where he was going. He couldn't. If the President of the United States couldn't stop these people, what chance did he have? His security team drove him in an unmarked black SUV, weaving through the back streets of D.C., avoiding main roads. The safe house wasn't some underground bunker or military facility. It was a small, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Low profile, untraceable. Andrew was already inside, pacing. The moment Barron entered, he turned, his face lined with exhaustion and anxiety. "We're in serious trouble," Andrew said, voice low. "Tell me something I don't know," Barron muttered, removing his coat. Andrew grabbed a folder off the table and shoved it toward him. Flight records, intelligence reports, documents that shouldn't exist. "They changed the flight path," Andrew said, flipping through the pages. "We knew that, but what we didn't know is why." Barron scanned the documents, his pulse quickening. "What am I looking at?" he asked. Andrew's face darkened. "Look at the names, the passengers on that flight." Barron's blood ran cold as he read the list. One name stood out among the rest, a retired Pentagon official, a man with direct ties to classified military operations, a man who had been set to testify before Congress about illegal activities within the intelligence community. "Oh my God," Barron whispered. Andrew nodded. This wasn't an accident, this was an execution. Barron ran a hand through his hair, his stomach twisting with unease. That means the crash was never meant to happen, Andrew finished. They needed to take him out. But they couldn't just assassinate a former Pentagon official. It had to look like a tragedy, a freak accident. Barron felt sick. 66 other people died just to cover up one murder, he said, his voice hollow. "That's how these people operate," Andrew replied grimly. "They don't just eliminate their targets. They bury them under so much destruction that no one ever questions it." Barron clenched his fists, anger, rage, a need for justice. "We have to go public," he said. Andrew hesitated. "Barron, if we do this—" "I don't care." Barron's eyes burned with resolve. "The families of those victims deserve to know the truth. The American people deserve to know the truth." Andrew nodded slowly. "Then we have to move fast." Barron knew there was only one way to make sure the truth came out. It had to come from someone the world couldn't ignore, someone they couldn't silence. Which meant it had to be him. The next morning he stood at the podium in the White House press room. The cameras were rolling. The entire nation was watching. "I am here today because I cannot stay silent," Barron said, his voice steady. 67 lives were lost in the Potomac River. The government called it a tragic accident, but I have evidence that proves otherwise. Gasps rippled through the room. Reporters exchanged glances, scrambling to take notes. "I have uncovered flight records, intelligence reports, and first-hand testimony that point to a cover-up. This was not a random tragedy. This was not pilot error. This was an assassination hidden under the guise of disaster." The room erupted into chaos. "Mr. Trump, are you saying the government is involved in a conspiracy?" a journalist shouted. "I am saying that the American people deserve the truth," Barron replied, "and I will not stop until they have it." Behind him, his father stood watching, silent, expression unreadable. But Barron had made his choice, and there was no turning back now. By nightfall, the story had gone viral. The world was in an uproar. The government scrambled to do damage control, denying everything, but it was too late. The truth was out. Barron sat in his suite, watching the news. He had won this round, but he knew this war was far from over. A knock at his door. He opened it. His father stood there, staring at him. "Do you know what you've done?" the president asked. Barron met his gaze, unshaken. "Yes," he said, "I started a revolution." The world was no longer the same after Barron Trump's press conference. His revelation had shattered the carefully constructed facade that powerful figures had built for decades. The headlines screamed of conspiracy, assassination, and a cover-up at the highest levels of government. The public, once mourning a simple tragedy, now demanded answers. The shadowy figures who had orchestrated this catastrophe had lost control of the narrative, and they were furious. That night, Barron sat alone in his dimly lit White House suite. His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through his phone, watching clips of news anchors struggling to keep up with the chaos he had unleashed. He had forced the truth into the open, but now the real war was beginning. A knock at the door made him tense. He knew this was coming. His father, President Donald Trump, stepped inside. His expression was unreadable, his gaze sharp and unwavering. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" his father asked, his voice controlled but edged with something dangerous. Barron met his gaze. "Yes." The president exhaled through his nose, pacing the room like a caged lion. "You think exposing this is a victory? You think these people will just let this go?" He stopped abruptly, fixing Barron with a stare that sent chills down his spine. "They will come after you. They will come after me. This isn't politics, son. This is war." Barron clenched his jaw. "They already came after me, Dad. They tried to scare me off. They tried to bury the truth, but they failed. I couldn't just sit back and let them erase those lives like they were nothing." His father's expression softened, but only slightly. "You don't understand how deep this goes. These people—" He paused, shaking his head. "They don't lose, and when they do, they make sure no one lives to tell the story." Barron swallowed hard, but his resolve didn't waver. Then let them come. By dawn, the deep state had mobilized. Media outlets owned by the very forces Barron had exposed began a coordinated counterattack. His credibility was torn apart on national television. A reckless conspiracy theorist, the spoiled son of the president, making up stories for attention. Barron Trump's shocking allegations lack evidence, says national security expert. But he had evidence, and the people knew it. The internet was ablaze with outrage. Protests erupted outside government buildings. The victims' families, once grieving in silence, now stood with signs and microphones, demanding accountability. That afternoon, as Barron sat in his father's office, the president's chief of staff burst through the door. His face was pale, his voice strained. "Mr. President, it's happening." "What's happening?" the president snapped. The chief of staff swallowed. "The Senate just announced an emergency intelligence hearing. They're launching a full-scale investigation into the plane crash." A heavy silence filled the room. Barron's heart pounded. They were actually doing it. "You forced their hand," his father muttered, rubbing his temple. "Now we see how deep this hole really goes." That night, Barron couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in his mind. He had expected backlash, he had expected media attacks, but what he didn't expect was silence. No calls from Andrew, no updates from insiders, just silence. A bad feeling settled in his gut. He grabbed his phone and called Andrew's number. It rang and rang and rang. "Andrew..." Then voicemail. He called again. Nothing. His stomach twisted. He had to do something. Without hesitation, Barron grabbed his jacket and moved toward the door. His Secret Service agents were stationed outside his room, as always. But tonight, they weren't looking at him like usual. They were looking at each other, communicating silently. Something was wrong. "Sir," one of them said carefully, blocking his path, "it's best if you stay inside tonight." Barron's blood ran cold. "Way?" he asked, his voice low. The agent hesitated. "Just a precaution." Barron's heart pounded. He stepped back, forcing a calm nod. "All right, I understand." Then he shut the door and immediately grabbed his phone. He typed a message to Andrew. "Where are you? Call me." He hit send. Seconds later, his phone buzzed, but it wasn't Andrew. Unknown number. "Stop looking. Stop asking questions, or you'll regret it." Barron's grip tightened around his phone. His worst fear had just been confirmed. They weren't just watching him, they were ready to act. Barron wasn't going to back down, but now he needed to be smarter. The next morning, he met with Andrew's trusted contacts, investigators, former intelligence officers, people who had whispered warnings but had never come forward, and they were scared. One of them, a former CIA analyst, slid a sealed file across the table. His hands shook. "I don't have much time," the man whispered. "But if you really want to know the truth, this is it." Barron carefully opened the file. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just one assassination. It was a pattern, a method, a system. The same deep state operatives had been responsible for countless other accidents, unexplained deaths, plane crashes, missing officials. And now, Barron Trump was on their radar. He clenched his jaw. No, he wasn't going to be their next victim. He was going to be their downfall. He stood up, gripping the file. "We take this to the public, now." That evening, Barron made his move. He leaked the classified file to independent journalists, ensuring it couldn't be suppressed. He scheduled a live broadcast. No edits, no scripts, just raw, undeniable truth. As he sat before the camera, a strange calm settled over him. He had come too far to stop now. For years, they have lied to us. They have controlled us. They have taken innocent lives and called it an accident. He exhaled slowly, his voice steady. But no more. They tried to silence me. They tried to bury the truth. But tonight, I bring it to you, the American people. The screen behind him lit up, names, dates, documents, irrefutable proof. And as the world watched, Barron Trump didn't just expose a conspiracy, he started a revolution. The moment Barron Trump finished his broadcast, the world stood still. Across America, televisions flickered with the images of leaked files, recordings, and satellite footage, proving that the DC plane crash was no accident. Social media exploded. Hashtags like Truth Exposed, Justice for the 67, and Deep State Revealed trended within minutes. Commentators struggled to keep up, scrambling for analysts to explain what was unfolding. Barron Trump had just done what no one else had dared to do. He had ripped open the shadows and dragged the deep state into the light. Yet even as millions watched in shock, the real war had just begun. Inside the White House, the air was thick with tension. President Trump stood at the center of the Situation Room, his hands gripping the edge of the table. His closest advisors surrounded him, their faces pale as the consequences of Barron's revelation sank in. "The phones won't stop ringing," one official muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. "The intelligence agencies are demanding a response. They say Barron compromised national security." President Trump exhaled sharply, his jaw tight. No, he didn't compromise national security. He exposed the ones who did. A heavy silence followed. Even those loyal to the president knew that what Barron had done was unprecedented. This wasn't just about a single plane crash anymore. This was about a system that had been controlling the country from the shadows for decades. Then the doors swung open. A Secret Service agent stepped inside, his voice urgent. "Sir, there's a situation." Trump turned sharply. "What now?" The agent hesitated. "The Pentagon just declared a state of internal emergency. They're locking down access to classified files." The room erupted into chaos. "They're trying to bury it," one advisor shouted. "No," Trump corrected, his expression darkening. "They're trying to stop what comes next." By morning, America was in an uproar. Protests erupted in major cities. Thousands of people gathered outside government buildings, demanding resignations, demanding justice. The families of the victims of Flight 217 stood together on live television, holding pictures of their lost loved ones, tears streaming down their faces as they pleaded for the truth to be acknowledged. Meanwhile, the deep state fought back. Multiple news stations, still under the influence of powerful elites, called Barron a fraud. The so-called evidence provided by the president's son lacks credibility, one anchor declared stiffly. "This is nothing more than a political stunt to undermine national security," said another. But the people weren't buying it. For the first time in years, Americans weren't accepting the mainstream narrative. The proof was too clear, the deception too great. Barron had ignited something much bigger than a single revelation. He had awakened a sleeping giant, and the deep state knew it. That evening, Barron sat in his room, his laptop open, scanning through the overwhelming response online. The messages poured in, thousands of people thanking him, praising him for standing up for the victims. But he knew what was coming next. The silence. The deep state had been caught off guard, but they wouldn't stay silent for long. They never did. Then, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. No voice, just breathing. Then, in a slow, chilling whisper, "You should have walked away." The call disconnected. Barron exhaled, setting his phone down. There it was, the real warning. They weren't just trying to discredit him anymore. Now, they were coming for him. Inside the Oval Office, President Trump was already preparing for war. "We need to go on the offensive," he told his inner circle. "We can't just sit back while they try to erase this." His chief of staff nodded. "The FBI is already investigating, but we both know they have insiders working for them." Trump clenched his fists. "Then we bring in the one group they can't control, the people." A press conference was scheduled. A formal investigation was launched, and in a move that would go down in history, Trump announced a direct, public hearing. "We are taking this to Congress, to the American people. No more closed doors, no more secret meetings. The truth will be known." As the world watched, the deep state was forced into a corner. They had spent decades silencing those who spoke out. But now they were the ones being exposed. That night, Barron sat alone, staring out the window of the White House. He should have felt victorious. He had done what no one else had dared to do. But he knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The people behind this, they wouldn't go down quietly. They would fight. And Barron Trump? He was ready. The night was long, and Barron Trump barely slept. The weight of what he had done, what he had exposed, pressed heavily on his chest. The whispers of the deep state had turned into roars, and now he was in their crosshairs. He had expected retaliation, but not at the speed or scale that it was now coming. As dawn broke, Barron sat in the Oval Office with his father. President Trump stood by the window, his silhouette outlined against the early morning light. He was silent, deep in thought, before finally turning to his son. "You've done something no one else has had the guts to do, Barron," his father said, his voice a mix of pride and concern. "But these people, we've both seen what they do to those who threaten them." Barron met his father's gaze. "I don't regret it." His father sighed, shaking his head. "Neither do I, but this fight isn't over." Then, a knock at the door. A security officer stepped in, his face pale. "Sir, we have a problem." President Trump's eyes narrowed. "What now?" The officer hesitated, then handed him a classified intelligence report. As Trump's eyes scanned the document, his expression darkened. He clenched his jaw, his hands tightening around the papers. "They're trying to erase everything," he muttered. "Files are disappearing. Witnesses are vanishing." Barron felt his stomach drop. The cover-up was accelerating. The deep state wasn't just trying to silence them. They were destroying the evidence, piece by piece, before it could reach the public. "We need to move faster," Barron said, his voice steady. "If they're erasing the evidence, we need to expose them before they can finish." Trump nodded. "Then we bring in the one thing they can't erase, the American people." That afternoon, the White House prepared for a massive revelation. Barron and his father worked tirelessly with their closest allies, ensuring that every piece of information they had uncovered would be broadcast across the nation. The recordings, the flight logs, the erased black box data, all of it would be released in real time. At exactly 7 p.m., President Trump stepped up to the podium in the White House press room, flanked by Barron and key investigators. Cameras from every major news network were rolling. "What we are about to share will change the course of this nation," Trump said, his voice firm. "The people deserve the truth." And then, the floodgates opened. As the world watched, the truth about the DC plane crash and the dark forces behind it was finally laid bare. The deep state had spent years operating from the shadows, but tonight, those shadows had been burned away. For the first time, they were the ones running scared. And Barron Trump? He had just made history. This story is more than just a tragedy. It is a testament to the power of truth and the courage to seek it. Barron Trump refused to accept the official narrative, pushing beyond the surface to uncover what others wanted to keep hidden. His relentless pursuit of justice reminds us that in today's world, we must question, investigate, and never blindly trust those in power. In modern life, where misinformation spreads rapidly, critical thinking is our greatest weapon. We must stand up for the truth, demand accountability, and refuse to let deception go unchallenged. Justice only prevails when people are willing to fight for it. If this story resonated with you, like this video, subscribe to the channel and share it with others. Together we can ensure that the truth is never silenced and those in power are always held accountable.